Hi everyone, thanks for the invitation to this symposium. In this talk, I will try to illustrate how specific cognitive processes could enable primates to manage multiple resources and to organize their behavior in space and time. And for this, I will particularly focus on data relating cognition and socio-ecological challenges in two contexts, in foraging context and also in mating context. So since it's still lunchtime, let's start with food. So foraging decisions are made of trade-off, and there are of course obvious benefits of eating food, but there are also some costs. There are costs in terms of the energy you spend to forage, but there are also costs in terms of the time that you spend for foraging, which prevent individuals from doing other stuff, like, for example, socializing, resting, having sex, whatever. And there are also predation costs, as any individual looking for food in the environment may be a potential prey. So foraging decision will vary depending on the species, but also on individuals. And basically, to simplify, there are two types of species. The first one are energy maximizer species who will make decisions based on the nutritional and energetic value of the food. And the other type are time minimizer species who will make decisions based on the time that it takes to find the food. So according to the optimal foraging theory, a species should forage in an efficient manner that maximizes the energy and minimizes the cost. Like foraging decision, mating decisions are also made of trade-off between the costs and the benefits that should lead individuals to allocate their time and their energy to activities in such a way that increase their fitness. So males and females constantly need to make mating decisions, which will imply to mitigate the physiological and physical costs associated with mating. So for example, you have intrasexual competition, increased vigilance, chronic stress, reduced feeding time. And at the same time, when you minimize the cost, you have to increase the benefit, which means achieving a higher reproductive success. Moreover, as for food, there are some increased predation risk during search and investment in the assessment of potential partners. So diverse mating strategy will influence how and when individuals select mates, the proportion of time and energy they will invest in both activity, for example, mating versus foraging, and how much mating effort and parental effort they will expend. In those particular cases, which is mating versus foraging or parenting versus mating, the two commodities can be considered as two options for which both availability and value will fluctuate with time. And by analogy with food, for which the value will depend upon availability, we expect an influence of females' availability and monopolization on male decision. And we also expect an influence of the operational sex ratio. So this ratio is the ratio of the number of fertile males versus the number of fertile females. And we expect an influence of this ratio on a female decision on the mating market. So when it comes to make foraging or mating decisions, several things have to be taken into account. So it's summarized in this slide. So you have to decide with whom to mate, for example. You have to decide what to eat, when, where, how, and why. And so in this talk, I will try to illustrate these different aspects. So when it comes to forage and foraging decision, the first criteria that individuals can use to select food is what to eat, which means the quality and so the nutritional and energetic content of the food. One of the other criteria to decide is when to eat. So it's based on the availability and the quantity of the food in the environment. And another criteria is where to find these resources, and it can be based on previous feeding experiences. All these decision criteria suggest that primates could not rely upon mere luck to find their resources. And this fact is true for great apes, of course, but also applied to different species of monkeys. And their foraging strategy rather imply mental representation of what, when, and where a specific resource would be available, as well as a course of action necessary to obtain it. And therefore, foraging behavior in primates seem to imply complex cognitive abilities such as value-based decision-making, episodic memory, which refers to the recollection of specific events that happened at a specific location and at a particular time. It can also imply long-term spatial memory and planning, which is imagining future events and preparing actions accordingly. Based on this view, it has been suggested that these foraging-associated capacities were favored during the course of primate cognitive evolution. And this idea resonates with what is often referred to as the ecological brain hypothesis, according to which environmental parameters associated with foraging have favored the evolution of cognitive complexity and brain size among primates. A recent study has actually provided a strong support for this hypothesis and emphasized the role of frugivory in the evolution of large brain in primates. And this hypothesis, this ecological brain hypothesis, is sometimes perceived as conflicting with the social brain hypothesis, according to which cognitive abilities and the associated brain size were driven by an increase in social complexity. But strictly, these two theories are not mutually exclusive, and indeed both sociality and ecology could have contributed to the modulation of cognition and brain size across primate species. Moreover, they rely both upon the same idea that global cognitive abilities are associated with a global neuroanatomical measure, which is usually the raw brain size. But this idea that global brain size represents a good proxy for global cognitive skills lacks experimental support, and it's not confirmed when you test it within a broad comparative perspective. For example, if you compare birds and primates. And thus, a major challenge for understanding primate cognition would rather be the identification of specific cognitive abilities and their neurobiological substrate, which both underlie adaptation to specific ecological or social challenges. So in that frame, size differences of specific cortical areas could better capture the adaptation of cognitive capacity that occurred in response to particular ecological condition. So that's why we have decided to try to fill this gap by investigating how socio-ecological parameters could explain variation of a specific brain region, which is the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the VMPFC. That we've heard about that already yesterday during a session. I'm thinking of the presentation of Raphaël Lebouc, for example. And we know that this VMPFC is involving cognitive operations such as decision-making behaviors or subjective evaluation. So what we have done in this study, it's combining approaches from behavioral ecology and neuroscience to try to assess how socio-ecological parameters could explain variation of brain measurement among 5 primate species. So it was about the rhesus macaques, the Japanese macaques, the gorillas, the chimpanzee, and humans. And for this study, we have compiled about 20 ecological and life history parameters that are summarized in this slide. So it was mainly about energetics data, diet, the use of space in the environment, evolution, sociality, and reproduction and life history. And we have tried to relate those variables to different cerebral measurements such as the brain size and the size of the VMPFC. And so the results show that the absolute volume of the brain was related to phylogeny, the daily travel distance, and group size. As expected, and as you can imagine, we found that there were higher brain volume for species closest to humans. We also find that the daily travel distance was positively associated with brain volume, which means that the brain volume was increasing with the daily travel distance. And regarding group size, it was surprising because we found a significant negative effect of group size, meaning that we found smaller brain for high group sizes. Regarding now the VMPFC, the best model to capture the difference in size of this region across species included not only phylogeny and group size, but also diet quality and weaning age. So dietary quality is an index of the complexity of the diet, and it's higher when you have, for example, animal items or fruits in the diet, and it's lower when you have only leaves. So these results show that suggest that coping with these ecological, socio-ecological factors would involve the cognitive operation in which the VMPFC plays a critical role. And we found that the dietary quality was positively associated with VMPFC, meaning that the VMPFC was bigger when the dietary quality was more complex, was higher. We also found a negative relationship with weaning age, meaning that we found a bigger VMPFC with earlier weaning age. If now we look at the ratio between VMPFC and whole brain, it reinforced the idea that the relationship between VMPFC and dietary quality is stronger than for the rest of the brain. So the main conclusion of that study was it was quite tricky to disentangle the respective role of social factors and ecological factors involved in the increase of cognitive abilities, especially because some social factors, such as the group size, are not independent from ecological factors. But nevertheless, altogether, our work reinforced the idea that ecological parameters, and particularly those related to foraging, could have played a stronger role than sociality in the evolution of overall brain volume. We also found that primate species with a more diversified diet, including fruits or animal, should require a solid capacity of selecting which course of action to take based on expected costs and benefits compared to species which have an easier access to resources such as leaves. Thus, the cognitive operation involving the VMPFC may have been favored among primates that forage in complex and viable environments for seasonal food resources such as fruits. And the negative influence of weaning age on the VMPFC that we found could be also interpreted along the same lines and could mean that being weaned earlier could mean that animals must start earlier to make appropriate foraging decisions, in part by selecting the right food and the right way to obtain it. So in other words, the VMPFC might provide the cognitive tools to survive both when animals need to obtain diverse food resources from a rich environment, and also when they must learn to forage on their own earlier in their life. So this present work was the first demonstration that the relationship between ecology, neurobiology, and cognition can be better captured with a more specific brain measure and presumably a more specific cognitive operation. So let's move now quickly to the other part of my talk, which is shorter and which is more about sex. And in this part, I will try to give you a quick overview of how primates might balance their mating decisions. Like for foraging, mating decisions are based on several criteria. For instance, males are predicted to allocate their mating effort toward the most valuable females, which means that males prefer to mate with dominant females or females who already had baby. And in some species, like for example in baboons or in different species of macaques like Barbary macaques or Assamese macaques, it has been shown that males exhibit mating preferences towards females with whom they have strong social bonds, which are called friendships. And in some cases, these males have higher chances of copulating with their friend and sire the next offspring. That's why this behavior of friendship was explained with the hypothesis called care then mate. So when it comes to females, they are usually the sex that bears a higher reproductive cost, and they are therefore expected to be even more selective in their mating decision. And male traits that females might select for in a mate are dominance, rank, unfamiliarity, and also sexual ornaments and weapons, which are badges of status in primates. Beside the quality of partners, mating decisions are also influenced by contextual factors such as the availability and the quantity of potential partners. So it was a question of who to mate with. But now, when it comes to the question of when to mate, a number of studies have shown that males of several species modulate their investment according to the timing. So, for example, according to the reproductive status of the female and the likelihood of ovulation. Altogether, it seems that individuals should choose mates not only based on the benefits they got in the recent past or expect to get in the near future, but also based on potential costs. And individuals should thus be able to flexibly integrate information about these potential benefits and costs and generate an appropriate decision rule. Given the complexity of social interaction in primates, a significant part of this information should imply high-level cognitive representation because it is not directly explicit. For example, choices should be based on the recognition of others' individual relative dominance rank and social relationship, but also on the nature and the quality of the recent interaction, the value of particular partners, and perhaps even other individuals' intention. Thus, it seems that mating decisions are unlikely limited to reflexes, to simple stimuli, and the more this mating decision rely upon integrating a multitude of socio-ecological factors, the more they should rely upon cognitive functions such as value-based decision-making or flexible planning. So to conclude on this, we can say that primates probably need to mobilize a complex and context-dependent mental representation of the social and reproductive value of their potential partners to plan their mating decisions. However, as we have recently pointed out in a review published a couple of months ago, there remain gaps in our understanding of the cerebral basis underlying social or sexual partner choice. And for example, you have a few questions here. We still need to understand the level of cognitive complexity that is required to track previous exchanges with partner and compare simultaneously the relative value of the different benefits provided by each potential partner. The other question that we need to answer is the question of whether all primates possess these enhanced cognitive skills. And for instance, in terms of memory and ability to quantify, and this remains to be clarified and represent a critical but challenging avenue for future research in natural settings. And finally, to conclude, we really need more comparison of this mechanism in non-primate species. So last slide but not least, I would like to acknowledge, of course, my collaborators and the funding agencies that funded this part of this research, and for instance, the Emergence program of Sorbonne University. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Cécile. It was great.
Did it work well? I was not cut.
Yes, congratulations. So I think we'll take one short question by Johannes Algermissen, who is asking, how selective is the VMPFC effect? Did you see it in other brain regions or not?
That's the next step.
Okay.
So, yeah, we have done that on the VMPFC, but we are planning to do that for the DLPFC too, and we would like also to apply it to the frontal pole. So that's the next step for a PhD project.
Thank you, Cécile. Charlie, welcome.